Okay, so imagine like living with a chronic illness, right? One where your immune system is kind of like attacking your body.
Yeah, it's like your defenses have turned against you.
Yeah, and in current treatments, they're often, it's like a frustrating game of whack-a-mole. You're trying to manage symptoms, but not really getting to that root cause.
Yeah, the daily struggle for millions of people dealing with pain fatigue and the uncertainty of flare-ups with autoimmune diseases.
Right, but what if there was a way to like hit reset on those immune cells that are misbehaving? And that's what has scientists buzzing right now.
Yeah, this is really exciting stuff.
Yeah, it centers around this groundbreaking new study using CRISPR gene editing and something called CAR T-cell therapy.
And this study has everyone talking
Uh,
because it's hinting at a future where a single treatment could provide lasting remission
wow.
and potentially change how we approach autoimmune diseases forever.
We're talking a potential cure.
You got it.
Not just managing symptoms, but like actually resetting the immune system.
That's the idea.
Wow. Okay, so this study published in Cell followed 3 patients with severe autoimmune diseases,
That's right.
2 with systemic sclerosis and 1 with myositis. And after receiving this experimental therapy, all 3 are now in deep remission.
Essentially disease-free.
Okay, before we get ahead of ourselves,
Sure.
let's break this down for our listeners.
Okay.
First, a quick anatomy lesson. Systemic sclerosis, or scleroderma, it's more than just a skin condition, right?
Right. It does cause a thickening and tightening of the skin because your body is producing too much collagen,
Okay.
but it can also affect internal organs like the lungs, the heart, and the digestive system, which can lead to very serious complications.
And then myositis that affects the muscles.
Exactly. Myositis is the inflammation of the muscles, causing weakness, pain, and in severe cases, difficulty with basic movements like walking or even breathing.
So these are serious conditions.
Very serious,
Yeah.
that significantly impact people's lives.
And we're talking about 3 individuals who are facing really tough odds.
Yeah.
And then this therapy comes along.
Right.
And deep remission. That's not just, I'm feeling a little bit better, right?
No, not at all. Deep remission in this context means they're showing practically zero signs of the disease.
Wow.
Imagine years, maybe decades of struggling, and then suddenly you have your life back.
That's incredible.
It's a game changer.
Okay, now for the million-dollar question, how does it work? I'll admit CRISPR and CAR T-cell therapy sound a bit like something out of a sci-fi movie.
It does sound futuristic, but the basic concept is actually quite elegant. Let's start with traditional CAR T-cell therapy. Imagine taking your immune system's soldiers, the T-cells, and giving them specialized training to recognize and eliminate a specific enemy.
And in this case, the enemy is?
In this case, it's those rogue B cells we talked about earlier. B cells are usually the good guys producing antibodies that protect us from infections.
Right, like the body's own little antibody factories.
Exactly. But in autoimmune diseases, these factories go haywire, churning out harmful antibodies that attack the body's own tissues and organs.
Oh, so they're attacking us
That's right.
instead of the bad stuff.
Exactly.
Okay.
So scientists figured out how to engineer T cells to target and eliminate those malfunctioning B cells.
So it's like retraining the immune system.
Yes.
Teaching those T cells to target the source of the problem
Yes.
instead of attacking healthy tissues.
Precisely.
Okay, now, traditionally, this is done using the patient's own T cells,
That's right.
which makes sense, right? It's less likely to cause rejection.
Right. It's their own cells.
But there's always a catch, isn't there?
There is.
Okay,
You're catching on.
what is it?
The downside is that it's incredibly expensive and time-consuming to make these personalized therapies. It's not something that can easily be scaled up to treat large numbers of people.
So not exactly a one-size-fits-all solution.
Right.
What's the alternative?
This is where this new study gets really interesting. Instead of using the patient's own T cells, they use donor T cells. Think of it like a universal donor for cell therapy.
Wait.
They call it allogeneic CAR T-cell therapy.
Yeah.
And it has the potential to make this treatment much more accessible.
Hold on, donor cells, as in from another person.
Yes.
My inner alarm bells are going off here.
I understand.
Isn't there a huge risk of rejection? That's why organ transplant patients need to take those powerful immunosuppressant drugs right.
You're absolutely right to be concerned. Using donor cells does come with a big hurdle. The risk of the recipient's body attacking those foreign cells, what we call graft versus host disease. And yes, it can be very serious.
So how did the researchers get around this rejection problem? Did they just throw caution to the wind?
Not quite. This is where CRISPR enters the picture. They used CRISPR-Cas9, the revolutionary gene editing tool, to knock out 5 specific genes in those donor T cells that are known to be major players in triggering immune rejection.
So it's like they gave these donor T cells a stealth makeover, like they can slip past the body's defenses undetected.
That's a great way to put it, and this new therapy called BRL-301 could hold the key to making CAR T-cell therapy far more accessible and affordable
That's amazing.
for countless individuals.
Yeah, that's the dream.
Yeah.
To make these groundbreaking treatments available to everyone who needs them. But before we get too far ahead of ourselves, let's rewind for a second and talk about CAR T-cell therapy and cancer.
Okay.
I know it's been hailed as a major breakthrough, but how does it actually work to fight cancer cells?
It all comes back to those engineered CARs, the chimeric antigen receptors we've been talking about.
Yeah.
Imagine you could give your T cells a set of instructions, a wanted poster of sorts, to identify and eliminate a specific target.
And with cancer, that target is.
In the case of cancer, those CARs are designed to recognize proteins found on the surface of cancer cells. They're like guided missiles programmed to home in on those specific cells and eliminate them.
So with cancer, we're talking about destroying an invader, those rogue cancer cells.
That's right.
But with autoimmune diseases, it's more like calming down a part of the immune system that's gone a little haywire.
Exactly. And that's what makes this new research so ingenious.
Yeah.
Scientists are now applying the principles of CAR T-cell therapy to autoimmune diseases. But instead of targeting cancer cells, they're engineering CAR T-cells to target those rogue B cells we talked about earlier.
So same idea, different target.
Right.
We're using those reprogrammed T cells to specifically target and eliminate the B cells that are causing all the problems in autoimmune diseases.
Precisely.
This isn't the first time scientists have explored this approach, is it?
You're right. While this new study has everyone excited because of its promising results, it's important to remember that this isn't our first foray into using CAR T-cells for autoimmune diseases.
So there are other research efforts underway, other clinical trials exploring this approach.
Absolutely. In fact, there's a website called clinicaltrials.gov where you can find a ton of information about ongoing clinical trials.
Okay.
It's a great resource if you're curious about the latest research on a specific disease or treatment.
Clinicaltrials.gov. Good to know. But for now, let's stick with the exciting world of autoimmune disease research. Are all of these trials focused on CAR T-cells that target CD19? Or are there other avenues being explored?
There are definitely other approaches being investigated. For instance, some clinical trials are looking at CAR T-cells that target a protein called BCMA, which is found on plasma cells.
Plasma cells, those are the ones that actually produce antibodies, right?
That's right.
Okay.
So instead of targeting all B cells, they're going after the antibody factories directly. It's all about finding the most effective way to restore balance to the immune system.
Makes sense. Are there any other cellular therapies showing promise for autoimmune diseases, or are CAR T-cells stealing all the spotlight right now?
CAR T-cell therapy is definitely having a moment, but it's not the only game in town for something like systemic lupus erythematosus, or SLE scientists are also researching other cell-based therapies.
Okay, give us the highlights. What else are they exploring?
One approach is hematopoietic stem cell transplantation, which has been around for a while. It's a more intensive procedure, but it basically involves replacing the patient's immune system with a healthy one from a donor. Then there's mesenchymal stem cell transplantation, which uses a different type of stem cell that has the ability to modulate the immune response.
Stem cells are amazing. It seems like they hold the potential to treat just about anything. What else?
Researchers are also looking at regulatory T cells, or TREGs.
Okay.
These cells act like the peacekeepers of the immune system, helping to suppress overactive immune responses. And let's not forget about natural killer cells, or NK cells, which are like the body's first line of defense against infections and abnormal cells, including those involved in autoimmune diseases.
Wow, it's incredible how much progress is being made on so many different fronts.
It's very exciting.
It really feels like we're on the cusp of a revolution in how we treat autoimmune diseases. But with all this talk about the potential of this new CRISPR-modified CAR T-cell therapy, we also need to talk about the challenges. We don't want to get ahead of ourselves, right?
Absolutely. While the results of this initial study are incredibly encouraging, it's important to remember that we're still in the very early stages of research.
So what are the big unknowns? What are we still trying to figure out here?
Well, this was a very small study, only 3 patients. To know if this therapy is truly effective and safe, we need much larger clinical trials with more diverse groups of patients.
3 people, while amazing, isn't quite enough to draw definitive conclusions.
Right. We need to see how this therapy performs in a larger, more diverse population.
What about long-term safety? That seems like a big one.
Absolutely. We need to make sure that these reprogrammed T cells don't stick around in the body longer than they should or start attacking healthy tissues down the road.
Right, because that's always a concern with any kind of gene editing, right? Ensuring that those edits stay where they're supposed to.
It's a risk with any therapy that involves modifying the body's own cells. We need to proceed cautiously and carefully monitor patients for any potential long-term effects.
And what about effectiveness? I mean, these 3 patients experienced remarkable remissions, but will this therapy work for everyone with autoimmune diseases?
That's the million-dollar question. Autoimmune diseases are complex, and they can vary widely from person to person. What works wonders for one person might not be as effective for another.
So more research is needed to determine which patients are most likely to benefit from this therapy. And I imagine there are other challenges as well, like cost and accessibility, as we touched on earlier.
You're hitting on some of the biggest hurdles facing new medical breakthroughs.
Yeah.
Even if this therapy proves to be a resounding success in larger clinical trials, making it affordable and accessible to everyone who needs it is a whole other challenge.
It's always the case, isn't it? The science races ahead.
It does.
But making these treatments available to everyone, that's the next frontier. But let's bring it back to our listeners. What does all of this mean for someone living with an autoimmune disease or maybe has a loved one who is? What's the takeaway message here?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway here for our listeners is hope. We're making incredible strides here.
Yeah.
It's not just about, like masking symptoms or managing symptoms.
Mhm.
It's about potentially like resetting the immune system altogether.
It's a beacon of possibility for sure.
Yeah.
Imagine a future where chronic debilitating illnesses like lupus, multiple sclerosis, rheumatoid arthritis could be treated with a single injection.
Wow.
That's the kind of impact this research could have.
That's the dream, right? A one-time treatment.
Yeah.
And that could provide lasting relief. I mean, think about how this could transform the lives of millions of people, right?
Absolutely.
No more juggling medications, no more endless doctor's appointments,
Right.
and no more living in fear of that next flare-up. And let's not forget the potential for fewer side effects compared to current treatments, which can often feel like trading one set of problems for another.
Right.
But as we've discussed, it's important to temper our excitement with a dose of reality. We're still in the early stages of research.
Okay.
Larger trials are needed,
Of course.
and we need to understand the long-term safety and effectiveness of this therapy.
So it's a waiting game, but a hopeful one, right? So for those who are listening and are like really interested in this and want to learn more, maybe want to stay on top of these clinical trials, where should they go? What resources are out there?
That's a great question for anyone interested in learning more about clinical trials for autoimmune diseases or any other health condition for that matter. I always recommend checking out clinicaltrials.gov.
Okay.
It's a comprehensive database of both publicly and privately supported clinical studies from around the world.
So it's like a Google search, but specifically for a clinical trial.
Exactly. You can search by condition, location, and even the specific type of treatment being studied. And I think it's very empowering for patients, especially those living with autoimmune diseases, to be proactive and stay informed about the latest advancements. Knowledge is power
It really is.
when it comes to making decisions about your health.
Absolutely. And speaking of knowledge, before we wrap up our deep dive today, I want to leave our listeners with one more thing to kind of ponder.
Okay.
We've talked about, CRISPR and how scientists are using this to modify donor cells for treating autoimmune diseases.
Right.
But what other possibilities does this technology hold?
Well, that's what's so fascinating about this field. If we can successfully re-engineer donor cells to treat autoimmune diseases like we've been discussing, the implications are enormous. Could we see off-the-shelf cell therapies for organ transplantation, eliminating the need for lifelong immunosuppressant drugs? Or could we even use this technology to target the underlying genetic causes of other diseases? It's really a field brimming with possibilities.
Yeah, it really feels like we are on the verge of something incredible here, a new era in medicine where we can, harness the power of our own cells to treat and potentially cure diseases that have plagued humanity for centuries.
Isn't that amazing?
It's definitely a journey worth following, and we'll be here to keep you updated every step of the way. Until next time, keep diving deeper,